Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Esther Kraku Show. Today I'm joined by Simon Dolan, one of Britain's most successful businessmen and entrepreneurs. His autobiography is entitled How to Make Millions Without a Degree and How to Get By Even If You Have One. Simon left school at 15 and believes university degrees are overrated, and now he's suing the government over what he believes is an illegal lockdown. This should be a very interesting interview. Hi Simon, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Esther.
So I wanted to ask you a bit about your lawsuit against the government over what you believe is an illegal lockdown. Can you tell me a bit more about that, please?
Um, yeah, I mean, it started for me probably not that long ago, maybe 6 weeks ago or something like that. And I was kind of looking at what was going on and, seeing the numbers and thinking, well, it just doesn't make any sense. Economically, it doesn't make any sense, which is where my brain normally starts. And so just looking from afar, really. And then the longer it went on, the more you realize actually this doesn't make any sense whatsoever because the death numbers are being exaggerated massively. The actual people that are being affected by it are essentially the old people in care homes, which is another big story all on its own. But the economic damage is just absolutely astronomical, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. The only business people you saw were those with their hands out, Branson and so on, just looking for a bailout from the government. So I was thinking to myself, just in my head, about whether there was anything anybody, how do you hold the government to account? Because these are people who are running the country in the same way as a CEO would run a company. And if the CEO was running a company this badly, you would sack him for sure. So it turns out that the way you do that is via a judicial review. And I came across a piece that a barrister had written saying that he thought that there were grounds for a judicial review. So I got in touch with him and said, you fancy doing it? And he said, yeah, for sure. And that was it. That was where it started, really. So the whole premise at the time was whether the lockdown was legal to start with, which is arguable, probably wasn't. But more importantly now, it's become far more about the proportionality of it. So it's almost like it kind of doesn't matter whether it was legal in the first place. In one sense, in a bigger sense, it really does. But more about, have you taken measures to make sure that you're weighing up the cost of life against the cost of the economy and the cost of life that you're purportedly saving on one hand with lockdown, but causing on the other, i.e. cancers and heart attacks and so on and so forth, which are going undiagnosed, not to mention suicides, domestic violence and so on. So it's become about something much bigger than I thought it was at the start, actually.
Yeah. And I mean, I personally got in trouble on Twitter when I mentioned that there is a huge opportunity cost with what's going on. Do we have to choose either this plague or starvation? How are we going to feed our families if the economy isn't running? But why do you think it's been an overreaction, in your opinion?
Um, well, it's kind of how the government wanted to be in the first place. So let's not go down any kind of conspiracy theories for now, because whilst they're fascinating, really fascinating, and some of them may be true, they're kind of unprovable at the moment. So if we just assume that the government went into this, hand on heart, thinking that it was actually the best thing to do, um, they then needed to spin it to the public. So how do you get people to stay indoors? You can order them to, which is kind of what they did. That's where the lockdown came in, but there's not enough police to enforce it. So how do you then get people to stay inside of their own volition? And so they had media people and behavioral psychologists and so on coming up with strategies for scaring the life out of people. And then they're all freely available. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff. This is stuff that's been published on the SAGE website or the SAGE part of the government website. And one of them was to make sure that the messaging scares people out of their lives. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that. So people literally thought that the plague was coming around the corner and they were all going to die of it unless they hid in their houses. So it was fairly easy psychology. You put the messaging out on fairly biased media and receptive media. And if you have, a story that says the Daily Mirror was a classic. 50,000 people will die on Easter Sunday. If you read that, you're going to go and click on the story or buy the newspaper for sure, aren't you? If they say, 4 people in an old people's home might die next Tuesday, it's no story, is it? So that's how it happened.
I mean, do you think that the infection rates would have stayed the same without the lockdown? Would have been roughly the same? What do you think? Because the overarching argument was save the NHS. You don't want to overwhelm the healthcare system. What do you think infection rates would have looked like if we hadn't had a lockdown?
I think they probably would have been the same. Yeah, arguably, you could say they probably would have been an awful lot better, because if they'd not had the lockdown, they wouldn't have stuck. They wouldn't have sent old people into hospital to catch it and then go back into the old people's home and spread it around. The vast majority of people that have died of this are people who died in care homes, and the rate is just astronomical. And like I say, that's a whole new area that needs to be investigated. The government literally sentenced these people to death. By mistake, I'm sure, but it doesn't really matter whether it was by mistake or by design. They did it. The effect is exactly the same.
I mean, one of the arguments for the fact that the government has been able to do this is because the UK's constitution is not like most countries. It's very fluid. It's not sort of one codified solid document. Do you think that this lockdown has kind of, I suppose, reignited an argument for a more codified constitution, or just a more solid Bill of Rights that's not that doesn't have, I guess, the bearing of a supranational institution like the EU over it?
Well, it would be nice to think you could go back to the to the American Constitution. That's a really good place to start. But we're so far away from that at the moment, as indeed America are, really. But you kind of see there it does actually protect a certain element of right. Which I think has been apparent in certain states. I think it was Georgia or something. They said, the governor there said, well, you were told it was a 2-week lockdown, so after 2 weeks everybody's going back out, and they did, and everything was fine. There was no problems at all.
Yeah.
And so I do think that would have protected quite a lot. It certainly would have protected things like the right to protest, political protest, the right to worship, the right to an education. All of these things were banned. Not many people know this. Churches are still closed.
Yeah. Oh, I know this.
The ones that are going to be open. Now, I'm not religious at all, but it does give a lot of people a lot of I don't know, hope or whatever it gives them in times like these. And so you would have thought, well, they're drafty old buildings mainly, and they're certainly not full up. So you would have thought that would be fine. Why close a church? Schools, they knew that schools didn't have any kind of threat whatsoever of spreading anything. They even said that in their own documents as late as 12th of March, and yet they closed schools. Why are you doing that? And the right to political protest, they closed that. So I think had you had a Bill of Rights, for want of a better word, then you would have had a lot more traction, I suppose. But we're better than a lot of countries in so much as there is a recourse. The judicial review is a recourse against the government, so we do have it. But it's just extremely complicated and extremely expensive. You've seen on the crowdfund thing that I did. I think we raised 150,000 or something. But the costs are probably going to be $500,000, maybe more than that. So it's not open to everybody, or almost no one really.
So what do you ultimately want to gain from this lawsuit? What would be a win in your opinion?
I think we've already won. To be honest with you, win, lose or draw in court, we've already forced them to give up the SAGE minutes, which they never wanted to do. And then you read down and you see why they never wanted us to see them. So we've won there. The lockdown is falling to pieces. We've seen that from the weekend. The rules that they're putting in are more and more ludicrous and arbitrary. There was one great one today where it is now officially illegal to have sex with someone in your own house. You can in the garden with 6 other people.
I still think that's a joke. That cannot be real.
No, it's actually true. Reading the legislation, it doesn't say having sex in the legislation, but the wording of the legislation means that that's exactly true. So you can have sex with 6 other people in your garden, assuming that the garden is private, but you can't have sex with one of them in your house. And you can't have them staying over. But presumably you could do it in the toilet, because they are allowed to come into the toilet. This is where we're at. This is the stupidity of it. And so I think we've won. Whether the judges agree with us or not is really, it's not irrelevant, because of the bigger picture, which is, they put this in place with there was no parliamentary debate whatsoever. The coronavirus bill didn't go in front of Parliament for debate until 39 days after it was in law, ratified in law. And even then, when they debated it, it was a virtual thing, and it had 2 hours where people just got up, pre-prepared speech, that was it. And that was how it went through. So you think, well, if they can do that for this, going forward, they can do whatever the hell they want. This stays on the statute book for 2 years, and then they say it automatically comes off. Only automatically comes off assuming they don't use it again. Now, we're going to have a winter flu without any shadow of a doubt. So there'll be a spike in deaths. Are they going to use it again? They can if they want, which means they can lock everybody up. And they can lock them up to prevent them protesting politically. Think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it really is a totalitarian government. So this is the far bigger picture. Kind of joke about the silly absurdities of the legislation. But the real bigger picture is the fact that they've been allowed to do this, and they have done it. And if we don't fight, then it's going to happen again. And what we're saying, basically, this can never happen again. The biggest, it's not an exaggeration to say that this is the biggest theft of rights in England ever.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other things, other than this lawsuit, obviously, which, you do make quite a few good points, and it's something that has been raised, not just amongst, by yourself, but by a lot of other people and personalities. They probably just didn't get as much media coverage. But apart from this lawsuit, you're also known for being quite critical of universities and higher education. Why do you think that degrees these days are not necessarily worth it?
That was... It was reported at the time. I said all universities are awful. It's just a soundbite that people use. I think university is really good for some people. My son's going to university. One of them, my eldest son's going to university. So I think it's really good for some people. But what my whole point is that if you go to university and it costs you whatever it costs, 8,000-9,000 a year or something, and you do that for 4 years, 3 years, and you look after yourself, you're going to run up £50,000 worth of debt. So my whole point was that if you're going to run up £50,000 worth of debt to get a degree in gender dance theory or whatever, what a ludicrous degree it might be, that's a Ben Shapiro one, then is it really worth it? Now, if you've got £50,000 up against the wall, then it's fine, go enjoy yourself. Because let's face it, university main times is for people going out and enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
So if money doesn't matter, then fine, knock yourselves out. But really, I was against the narrative, the government narrative of, if you go to university and get a good degree, then you're going to go on and get a fantastic job. And everybody patently knows that's not true, except the poor sods who are 12 years old and being taught to work really hard in school so they can get great exam results, so they can go to a good university, so they can get a fantastic degree, so that they can have £50,000 worth of debt and still not have a job at the end of it. So that was my real thing. If you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or you're an academic and you love that stuff, then of course go to university. It's great, and you will earn more money. And so in some professions, the only way you're going to get in. Just not for, 70%, 80% of people.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of leveled the same criticism at universities, and it's something that I do, talk about very often. I'm very critical of universities, not just because they kind of sell false dreams, but also because they kind of make young people think they have to go one sort of path to success or have one path to success. I think the bigger question for me here with regard to universities is not just the fact that they cost a ton and, they're not really a good test of academic ability considering they're universities that let you in with like BCC grades or whatever. But it's more of the political leanings of a lot of lecturers these days. I mean, I went to University of Bristol. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I do speak a lot about the fact that my experience was very, very overwhelmingly left wing. And to this sense that it kind of woke me up to actually see that wasn't really my political home. I hadn't really thought about it much before then. But I said, this is just not for me. This is completely the bigotry of low expectations just smacking me in the face. And, I effectively became a black woman when I went to university because there were all these expectations that were put on me of my oppression. So I'm more concerned with the kind of leftist leaning narrative of a lot of universities. What do you think of that? And why do you think that is the case, if it is the case, in your opinion?
I think it's a great point. I don't think I addressed that in the book at all, actually, but it is. It's more and more so. You only need to see that with the suppression of free speech in most universities. You get the student union that says that they don't want so-and-so to turn up, just because they've got different views. I got a friend of mine, a guy called Yaron Brook, who is one of the smartest guys that I know. He's the chair of the Ayn Rand Institute in the States, and he lectures all over the world. And even he's being pulled up on it. And, he's the most intelligent guy, completely, there's no there's no side to him other than he just wants to put these theories out there. And, love them or hate them, they've been proved to be true and work in every country on earth forever. So at least, you should be given the opportunity to hear them if you're a student, particularly if you're paying £9,000 a year. But to sit and have, a student union guy say that you can't listen to that person, but you can listen to some, transgender that goes in drag and gives you a lecture on lesbian dance theory, for example, that's okay. So yes, I think it's dreadfully wrong, and universities should be places of thinking and people being taught how to think, not what to think. Yeah. So it's dreadful. Why all lecturers seem to be left wing?
Is beyond me. I cannot believe someone would go to university for that long and has just kind of shut out the ability to think critically.
Well, I suppose it's simply because they go into academia and then they've never had a job other than outside of academia. And I suppose you just sit outside of a commercial world and you think, that basically that very childish sort of idea of wouldn't it be lovely if everybody was nice to each other and life was fair and everybody had everything they wanted. It would be lovely. Of course it would be lovely. But that's not how the commercial world works. I did an interview the other day with, funny enough, a guy I used to go to school with, and he lectures in Tokyo, university there. And he is same as us, sort of laissez-faire capitalist, I suppose. And he's completely the minority. He dared suggest something the other day and he got unfriended on Facebook, which I thought was a bit odd for a 50-year-old man. It was something completely innocuous,
Yeah.
And I'm hearing stories today from friends in America that younger people, and they're being blocked by their friends if they're not putting on social media that, the whole Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, the whole George Floyd situation. I mean, look, I can't even. I've left Instagram. I cannot believe. And the thing is, it's so weird because everyone wants to kind of put you in a political box. But I would say I'm not even the most. I believe center right leaning of most of my friends. I just happen to have quite a center right background. That was the way I was raised. Those are the values that I was raised with, and so that's kind of just who I am. But I'm not even the most conservative out of all of them, and I have just been experiencing all hell because I said, oh, well, actually, statistically, and then everyone just loses their mind. So, I just
use facts and statistics against these people.
Oh yeah, yeah, and hearts, and it's just this is the thing that I'm frustrates me because I find that people that go into conversations with an ego that, I have a degree from Oxbridge or Warwick or Bristol, and so you can't tell me this. When you go in with a certain ego because you've been propped up by, an echo chamber, there is no point in discussion. And I find it very disheartening, and I find it very boring, actually. I always say my favorite people to have conversations with are farmers and, gardeners and people I can learn practical skills from, because there's just a complete lack of ego. There's just, there's a pride in just knowing what you know and being comfortable with that and being open-minded. But I feel like that's not something that a lot of young people are learning these days. We're just learning to have the weight of an LSE degree and then question why you don't have a job or the ideal job 6 months later after graduating. So, that's sort of been my experience.
No, you're absolutely right, and it'll change, because these people basically everybody's a socialist until they're about 30, aren't they? And then they grow up. It's just that everybody. I never was. I mean, I was a bit like you, I guess. I
don't think I could ever be a socialist.
I never thought it was ever right. In something intrinsically, I guess it just comes from being independent and not wanting to rely on somebody else. And it's very interesting, actually. The people who want to be locked up are also the people who wanted to stay in Europe. So there's a very big divide, and you think, well, why is that? Logically, that makes no sense whatsoever. But of course it does when you think, well, actually what they're after is protection. Yeah. So by staying in Europe, they want to be protected by this bigger government. It seems nicer to be part of a bigger group. And then when the government tells them they need to be locked up, well, okay, I'll definitely do, because government's always got my best interests at heart, so I'll definitely do what you say. Whereas the more independent thinker goes, well, actually, smaller government's usually better. I'm sure we can negotiate our own trade deals. And who the hell are you telling me to stay at home? This doesn't make any sense. So it's weird. It shouldn't be a left-right thing at all. but it just
But it
has
is.
become that way.
And now it's an insult. Like, if you voted Brexit, I didn't even vote for Brexit. And now Brexiteer is an insult, right? Tory voter or conservative is an insult. And I'm like, well, has it ever occurred to you that most people that take the positions that they do, that you don't necessarily agree with, have actually thought it out? I'm someone who very much loves debate and loves back and forth. I've debated for, I think, since I was 14. I've gone on like competitions and stuff like that. It's something I'm very passionate about, not because I like to stand somewhere and kind of mic drop or whatever it is, but because I like to sharpen my mind. I think that's an art that's being lost among young people that are sitting there with swollen pride of the fact that they got a degree from this university and yet can't understand why someone has a differing opinion to them. It's quite ridiculous. I mean, the last thing I wanted to ask you is, you know, generally speaking, we've always known you as a businessman and an entrepreneur, at least people that are familiar with you. We've never really seen you get into the political sphere in this way, in the sense that obviously you're suing the government, so that's as political as you can get. Where would you say you lean politically, in terms of your political ideology, and what would your advice be to young people approaching, politics? That's something obviously we're very passionate about here at Turning Point.
Yeah, you're right. I've never really got involved before because I've held with complete disdain politicians in general, because to me, coming from a business background, they all appear like middle managers that are just desperate to keep their job, but they can't really do anything. You know, everything's run by a committee, and you never see a statue of a committee, do you? You know, that whole thing. So it's never interested me because I don't think you can actually get anything done. And I suppose this just annoyed me to the extent that I wanted to do something. And then you get sucked into it, and then you think, actually, there's something bigger going on here. And then I become interested in it, and so that's where I go. But I think what's sad is that, you know, this whole thing between left and right. I've thought about this a lot, but you know, you're left on one side, and if you go any lefter, you know, you're a communist, and you go right along a line, and when you get to the end of that line, you're a fascist. And it appears as though these things, I mean, you see, it appears as though these things are completely diametrically opposed. But it's not a line at all, it's a circle.
Yeah, it is.
You circle meets at the top with communism and fascism, which is essentially exactly the same thing.
It's just how you get there that's different.
Yeah, but I want to be political leaning. I want to be completely the opposite side of that circle. So I don't want to be told what to do by anybody. I don't want to have my property taken away by anybody in the forms of, you know, whatever it might be, coercion or tax or whatever it might be. So I'm neither left nor right. I'm that bit that comes right down the middle. And I think that's laissez-faire capitalism. You know, the government fundamentally should be there to protect you from invaders. So that's why we have the army. And they should protect you and uphold the force of law. And that's why we have the police. Anything outside of that, they need to really justify why a whole bunch of people should get your money and go and spend it on something. Because patently, they're very, very poor at doing it. You know, the NHS is a great example. Oh, it's the envy of the world. It isn't. It really isn't the envy of the world. It's a bit of a joke. You know, it's what's the budget now? 180 billion?
Yeah.
Think about how much that is. 3 billion a week. You could build anything for 3 billion a week. 3 billion a week. I'll solve everything. You know, world poverty, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yes, don't get sucked in. Remember what the government is there for. If they're doing anything other than upholding law and or protecting you from invading armies, then they really shouldn't be in your life. And if they are,
don't worry, I intend on writing a book about that. That's something that's been in the works for the last 2 years. Just writing a book. It's literally like why the government sucks at virtually everything. And
that's a brilliant title.
Yeah, isn't it? I might tweak it a little bit. Don't tell anyone. But that has basically been. I'm very much into political philosophy, and that's definitely something that I've been working on because I completely have the same stance. I don't tend to care where most people fall politically. So far as we go into a discussion, assuming that I'm not a terrible person and you're not a terrible person, and that you can have a laugh at some point, you don't take yourself too seriously or think you're Madonna. I think I get on with most people. But yeah, I definitely have the same stance. So what would your advice be for young people, finally? Just, you know, in life in general, you're a very successful man. You've obviously helped a lot of people and you inspire a lot of people. What would your message be to young people in this awful year that is 2020?
Think for yourself. That's all it comes down. You know, you can read everything online. You can... all the information in the entire world that's ever been produced is in your telephone or online, you know. There's no reason at all why you should be a lazy thinker. And you're a lazy thinker if you're just taking narrative from someone, be that me or you or the BBC or Breitbart or whoever it might be, doesn't matter. Just have a look at it and see what makes sense to you. And whatever makes sense to you, well, then go with that. And if you're proved wrong, change.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Simon. It's been such a pleasure having you.
I enjoyed it, Esther. Thanks for having me on.